Well, would you look at that? It's already 2019. And I have been into PC hardware for 10 years now. It's been a wild ride. I don't have that much to add. I'm not going to do the in-depth scrolling through archived articles like I did for the previous videos, because really all I have to cover is quarter 3 and 4 of 2018 and what's happened through February of 2019. So I'll just be talking here. The only things to cover, the only things I really left out from the last video were the RTX launch. Although I've really covered that in a lot of my recent videos, so my opinions are very well known. What I'll center around is just the retrospect that I'm surprised that RTX was perceived badly. If you've watched the rest of my series, you'll see that I watched the Titan launch for $1,000 and only beat the 7970 by 40%, right? I mean, really think about that, people. It was $400, you know, the 780 was $650, double the price of the 280X, and only about 10 to 20% stronger. You know, seeing RTX come out just doesn't surprise me. Maxwell, again, the 980, at least around launch, was really only 10 to 20% stronger than the 780 Ti, and it cost $100 more than the 290X. I mean, it just has never seemed that weird to me. But what's been interesting to watch is how Nvidia's shenanigans have finally caught up with him for some reason. And again, I need to point out that Pascal, the 1080 launch with the crappy cooler on the Founders Edition for 700 AIB cards were $750. That's really the same price as about the 2080. The Titan was $1,200. That's really no different than the 2080 Ti. And remember, the original Titan Pascal was cut down just like the 2080 Ti is. It wasn't the full 102 die. So I don't think things have changed. I just think people have finally noticed. The only difference is and this is Captain Hindsight here, right? I think NVIDIA, I would have thought they got away with it, like I just said. But in hindsight, I think all NVIDIA should have done, in reality, is priced the 2080 at $750 instead of $800, and made it so it wasn't a cut down die. That was especially egregious, really. I mean, they're already using 104 dies, which just 5 years ago were the, you know, like the 60 Ti area level of performance. At the very least, they should have given you the full 3072 CUDA cores, the full amount of Tensor and RT cores. And that would have boosted performance, not by much, but maybe by 5%. A little 5% stronger here. Maybe lower the price by $50. I think it would have sold a little better that way. I think it was just the fact that it wasn't really clearly better than a 1080 Ti. And then people just were pissed about that. Straight up pissed. Additionally, I think they should have just given the 2080 Ti the full 12 gigabytes of RAM and called it a Titan. They could have gotten away with it. No one would have complained about the price if it had 1 more gigabyte of RAM and it was called a Titan. In fact, they probably could have sold it for $1,500 and no one would have cared. You know, that's what I want to point out is NVIDIA's marketing is just so masterful. Really ask yourselves, if 2080 Ti is selling out, if it was a couple $100 more but had 1 more gigabyte of RAM and was called a Titan, even if they had a Titan RTX for 2500 with double the RAM, people would have just said there's 2 Titans. We're used to 2 Titans. There was the Titan XP and the Titan Volta. They would have gotten away with it. And I think that's probably what NVIDIA will try if Navi doesn't pan out. But yeah, it was very weird to see me defending Turing because at least it was, you know, 30 to 40% stronger than the 1080 Ti, and it had zero competition, whereas before I thought AMD always at least put up some competition. Not much else to say about Turing. I'll have more to say in later videos, and you can catch my previous ones. The only other things to mention that have happened recently is the 590 launch, and this is just, again, AMD in full-on, who cares, bare minimum mode. They know they will hold 25 to 35% of the market with minimal R&D spending that they can all put towards Ryzen, which will make them way more money. I expect AMD to push really hard with their graphics in 2021 or 2022. Maybe 2020, depending on how much money they get soon. But until then, expect them to just kind of keep up with the X80 of Nvidia. You know, the 590 was kind of rushed out when they saw how crappy RTX was. They wanted to get a mid-range card out that was technically new and could be marketed as 12 nanometer for the holiday season. It's the only reason the 590 exists. In fact, they were never going to release the Radeon 7. They produced some extra stock and put it aside, you know, the worst yields of the MI50s. But RTX underperformed. But then Navi got delayed a quarter or two, so they decided to release it anyways so that they could have launches. And this is something AMD said, is they're going to have graphics launches. I think it's every quarter now. So there should be something next quarter. They'll probably have some kind of a Navi launch, even if it's like the most cut down version. And it will probably be a paper launch, but that's their motto now. So that was interesting to watch. Only other launches that have happened in 2019 is the 12 nanometer Ryzen. At this point, it's abundantly clear that Ryzen is a more efficient architecture than Nvidia's. Than Intel's. I mean, if I look here, the R73750H is a 4 gigahertz, 2.3 gigahertz base, 35 watt APU, and this is fighting Intel's 45 watt, 4.1 gigahertz, 2.2 gigahertz base. So they're roughly even, but one's using less energy and the graphics are probably twice as powerful. And this is on an inferior 12 nanometer FinFET node, which is a bit behind, probably 20% behind Intel's 14 nanometer plus, and probably even like 30% behind their newest 14 nanometer. And you know, they launched their APUs last because they don't need the highest performance for their laptops because efficiency is where Ryzen shines. At the end of this year, expect a 3 gigahertz base, 4.5 gigahertz boost, 25 watt Ryzen quad core, and even Hexa and 8 core to come out with even better Navi graphics. Probably at the tail end of this year. That'll be interesting. It's going to get pretty ridiculous when you can get probably pretty close. Well, at least I would say PS4 performance in an 15 watt, 25 watt APU. That'll be crazy. So the only other thing I want to add to this video is in retrospect. Over the last 10 years, I saw a battle royale where AMD was slightly ahead of Nvidia go to Nvidia fully in control of the market, and AMD making do with what they can with as little spending as possible. This isn't a bulldozer situation. People say that, but keep in mind, AMD is 5 gigahertz 8 core. Couldn't completely beat a 4 gigahertz dual core i3 while using quadruple the energy. We're not there, people. It's not that bad. It's not as bad as bulldozer, but it is, I would say, at least as bad as the 8800 GT era. It's pretty bad. AMD's behind. There's no way around it. I do expect them to come back, though, in the next year and basically be tying Nvidia again within 2-3 years. So it's just going to continue to be a grind until then. At least they're keeping the $200 segment not completely absurd in pricing. Additionally, in retrospect, when I entered PC gaming in 2009, dual cores were recommended, and you could still get single cores on desktop. They were cheap, but they were still there. And at this point, you can't even boot a lot of games without 4 threads, which is crazy. I mean, when I was building my first PC, I remember the Phenom 2 x6. I remember Gulf Town x6 that you could the Gulf Town i7 990X that you could overclock to 4 gigahertz or so. And that was 6 cores, and that was $1,000. Now you can get 6 cores for $150, and it's about double the performance. Now for 50% more money, instead of getting a 6 core, you can get a 32 core at 4 gigahertz. It's absolutely crazy how far CPUs have come, and I think that CPUs aren't going to slow down. I think AMD is going to continue on this pace for another 2 years, but that's for another video. And APUs were an experiment when I got into PC gaming. I remember the Llano launch of APUs, and I remember distinctly on Newegg someone's review where they said, "Oh my God, an integrated GPU actually beat my discrete GPU." I remember videos of, can a Fermi GT520 run Battlefield 3, and it could barely at like low settings in 720p, and people made do with really shitty graphics, I gotta say, in like 2010 sometimes. I remember these videos of like Bobcat APUs running games at like 24 frames a second, people going, it's playable, which is just unacceptable now. And now, not only was Llano as good back then as like a GT, I don't know if it existed, 530 or 540, or I know it was pretty much exactly equal to an HD 6450. And that was an APU, 100 watts total, that matched like a PS3 in performance. Sure, it was a few years after the PS3 came out, but that was pretty crazy. And now we have APUs that can run 1080p medium settings in a lot of games, 60 frames a second. And they're probably going to double in performance again next year. It's very cool to see laptops now. You know, it's very nice to have 4K gaming slowly become the standard on desktop PCs, because that means on my laptop I can run it in 1080p, a fourth the resolution, and my APU can run the game at medium frames a second, and while I'm on the go, I can game. I can play Battlefield. I can play Doom at 1080p, which looks good enough for when I'm on an airplane. You know, that just was not a thing back then, and I expect that they continue to get more crazy. I expect within 2 years, 16-hour battery lives and PS4 level performance and, you know, ultrabooks. It's going to be great. And the last thing I'll touch on is something you might not expect me to comment on, but that's consoles and also PC. I remember in 2006, there was this war of attrition between Microsoft and PlayStation when it came to how low they would sell their basically high-end gaming PCs as consoles. Like, it cost Xbox in 2005 $800 to make their 360, and it cost Sony $800 in 2006 to make their PS3, and they were sold at a loss for half of their lives. I don't think Microsoft ever recuperated their costs, and that made people go, look how good these consoles are. PC gaming's dead. And then in 2010, there was this renaissance in PC gaming, and all of a sudden, console gaming's dead. And then the PS4 came out with streaming, and guys, consoles nor PC are going to die. Over the past 10 years, I've seen no indication either are going anywhere. And furthermore, I've seen no indication that streaming games is ever going to replace enthusiast builds. Maybe we'll just have 300 watt APUs in the future, like that one video I made describe might happen. But that'll still be an enthusiast PC. And anytime we get better streaming, better internet connections, we're going to go to 200 hertz gaming or 8K resolutions, and those just aren't doable over streaming. Not for competitive gaming. I mean, I overclock my RAM, the communication protocol on my motherboard to lower latency as much as possible, because I can really feel that, and there will always be people that feel that. Maybe in 5 or 10, I could see 5 or 10 years streaming games being a real thing. I know Google's launching something now, and Amazon is too, but you know, we see it every few years. PC gaming is here to stay, console gaming is here to stay, and streaming will eventually be here to stay, but it's never going to replace us. It's been a fun 10 years, and I will be starting a new series now on what I see Intel, AMD, and Nvidia doing over the course of this year, and how I see their really the slugfest going over the next year. Hope you'll watch that series as well. Thanks to all new subscribers, listeners, and people who like my videos. Please share this series. This took a lot of work. I put effort into it. I have a real mic now, if anyone remembers how crappy my old mic was. Like, subscribe, share. Let me know what you thought overall the past 10 years have been like for PC or console gaming, or just gaming in general. All right. Thanks, everyone.